Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's Undunted. Former president of the Cameroon's Bar Association and longtime anti-corruption advocate, Akere Muna, has issued a powerful statement rejecting the outcome of Cameroon's October 12th presidential election, which declared President Paul Biya the winner. Speaking as a civil society leader, founder of the Now movement, and a one-time presidential candidate, Muna described the election as a fraudulent exercise that marked the continuation of a 43-year system designed solely to preserve power for the incumbent regime. Well, according to Muna, the electoral process was manipulated at every stage, from organizational to proclamation, by institution loyal not to the constitution but to the ruling establishment. He accused the Constitutional Council of abandoning its judicial responsibility, functioning as a mere endorsement mechanism for what he termed a constitutional coup, getting statistical inconsistencies and improbable voter turnout and his figure. Muna asserted that evidence of electoral fraud was overwhelming and reflected the regime's disregard for the Cameroonian people. He noted that his own name and vote appeared in official results despite his former withdrawal from the race 11 days before the election, a situation he said highlighted the deep flaws within the system. The statement denounced the results, which credited the incumbent with 86% of the vote in what they call the Northwest region, a figure Muna described as impossible given the ongoing instability in that part of the country. He warned that such manipulation had eroded the social contrast and deepened divisions across the nation. Muna further condemned the arrest of opposition leaders following post-election unrest, calling the government's action an irresponsible provocation driven by fear of its own citizens. He expressed sorrow for the loss of lives in the violence that erupted after the 26th of October, blaming the government for placing power above the people's welfare. In his statement, Muna urged the government to take immediate steps towards restoring legitimacy and peace. He called for the unconditional release of the political prisoners and the initiation of a sovereign national dialogue aimed at crafting a framework for a genuine democratic transition. Muna concluded with a message of defiance and hope, reaffirming his commitment and that of all reform-minded Cameroonians to continue the struggle for a legitimate, just, and united republic. According to him, he emphasized that the people of the Cameroons deserve a government of their choosing, not one imposed on them like a masquerade, what he termed a corrupt and cynical political masquerade. Well, it's amazing that they all understand that the election was just a selection, and now everyone is speaking up. All right, there is still more reports here. This is from the Voice of Ambazonians, and this particular one, the United Nations refusal to endorse Paul Biya's contested victory in Cameroon's October 2025. Presidential election has sent shockwaves through the nation and across the world. The decision, accompanied by a call for an independent investigation into the vote and the ensuing of violence, marks a rare moment of international rebuke for a government long accused of manipulating the democratic process. What had once been a predictable ritual of disputed election and swift congratulations from abroad has instead turned into moments of diplomatic isolation for one of Africa's longest serving leaders. Following the Constitutional Council's announcement that Paul Biya had secured just over 53% of the vote, the country descended onto unrest. Opposition figures rejected the outcome, claiming widespread violence and also fraud. While demonstrators erupted in major cities including Douala, Garoua, and Yaoundé, security forces responded with force, leaving casualties and deepening the public's anger. The UN's intervention, urging restraint, accountability, and transparency, underscores a growing global consensus that the legitimacy of Biya's rule is eroding. Observers note that the UN stance exposes three critical realities: the collapse of legitimacy, the onset of international isolation, and the resurgence of hope among citizens who feel silenced by decades of repression. The ruling system, once presented as a guarantor of stability, is now increasingly seen as a source of national division. Cameroon's institutions, from its judiciary to its security forces, appear more aligned with preserving the regime from protecting the public. Amid this crisis, the rumored possibility of a papal visit has sparked controversy, with critics warning that such a gesture could be perceived as tactics or a tactic endorsement of a government facing accusations of brutality and corruption. Cameroon. The French Cameroon now stands at a decisive crossroad. The UN's response has laid bare a fundamental truth: peace cannot endure without justice, and unity cannot be achieved through coercion. For more than 4 decades, Biya's leadership has relied on the performance of democracy without its practice. But as the world turns its gaze towards Yaoundé, that long-running performance appeared to be nearing its final act, and the question of who truly represents the will of the Cameroonian people grows impossible to ignore. Now let's get that audio from Dr. Mungwa.
Today is Saturday, November 1st, 2025. This is the voice of Amba. Our editorial for today is titled, "The UN Rejects Biya's Victory, a Blow to Cameroon's Credibility." Fellow Ambazonians, across the world, the sound of disbelief is echoing from New York to Yaoundé. The United Nations has refused to endorse Paul Biya's so-called victory in the October 2025 presidential election, and the shockwaves are reverberating through every corridor of power in Cameroon. For over 40 years, Biya's regime has perfected the art of performing democracy without ever practicing it. But this time, the world is not applauding the performance. The United Nations has called for an independent investigation into the vote and into the violence that followed, a diplomatic message that speaks louder than any congratulations ever could. When the Constitutional Council in Yaoundé announced Paul Biya as winner with just over 53% of the vote, few believed it. Opposition leader Issa Tiroma Bakari cried foul, claiming he had won outright. Then the streets erupted. Protests broke out in Douala, Garoua, and Yaoundé itself. And once again, soldiers fired on civilians whose only crime was demanding truth. The UN statement was measured but clear. It called for restraint, for justice, and for answers. But its silence on congratulations, its refusal to validate Biya's victory, is the loudest message of all. For the first time in many years, the international community has looked beyond the illusion of Cameroon's stability and seen the truth beneath the mask: a country divided by tribe, weighed down by corruption, and drifting into chaos. This UN rejection has 3 powerful meanings. First, it is a crisis of legitimacy. A ruler who claims to embody stability is now the source of instability. His power stands on sand, not consent. Second, it signals growing isolation. When the UN withdraws its trust, others follow. Cameroon's diplomatic doors are beginning to close. And third, it reawakens hope. For the oppressed, for the families whose children languish in jails and whose villages have burned, this moment tells them that truth is not forgotten. The world is watching. The crisis is not only political, it is moral. Cameroon's state institutions have become tribal instruments. The security forces serve a man, not a nation. The church and the mosque are now drawn into the same game of symbolism and power. And in the midst of this turmoil comes the rumor of a papal visit to a country bleeding from corruption, tribalism, and repression. For many, this would not be a pilgrimage of peace, but a gesture of complicity. It would risk turning faith into politics, and politics into religious division. This is not the moment for such a visit. When truth bleeds, the church must stand with the wounded, not with the wounders. Cameroon stands at a crossroads. It can cling to a dying system, or it can begin to heal. The UN's message is clear. There can be no unity without justice, no peace without truth, and no recognition without reform. For over 40 years, Paul Biya has governed through the performance of democracy. Today, that performance has lost its audience. The stage is empty, the curtain is falling, and the world is finally asking the question that Cameroonians have asked for decades: who truly speaks for the people? This has been the voice of Ambazonia Radio, truth in resistance, clarity in crisis. Good night, and may truth light our path to freedom.